Rost is a subpar healer who only knows a single basic healing spell. Because of this, he gets kicked out of his party and is called an ignorant loser by those around him. One day at the guild, a girl approaches Rost and asks to form a party with him. This is so surprising that everyone in the guild goes from minding their own business to a state of utter disbelief. Even Rost can't understand why she would want to team up with him. However, the girl points out that he's holding a party recruitment sign, so he's clearly looking for members. The girl introduces herself as Narusena, a martial artist in need of a party member. Before Rost can agree, however, the guild receptionist, Amherst, interrupts, pulling Narusena aside to warn her about Rost. Amherst explains that Rost is a healer but can only use the basic heal spell, despite having been an adventurer since he was a child. Unable to use area heals or advanced healing magic, he's widely regarded as incompetent. Until recently, he had been part of a party called Blade of Lightning, but he performed so poorly that he was eventually kicked out. Now no one wants to team up with him anymore. Amherst urges Narusena to ignore Rost, calling him so ignorant that teaming up with him would be a waste. Narusena, however, has plenty of money and isn't concerned with profit right now. To prove it, she pulls out a bag brimming with coins, nearly shocking Amherst with her carefree display. Amherst warns her that not all adventurers in the guild are law-abiding, so she should be careful about flaunting cash. Narusena thanks her for the advice but seems unconcerned. Assuming Narusena is new to adventuring, Amherst offers to set her up with beginner-friendly partners, though of course there will be a fee for the service. Narusena appreciates the offer but insists that she's already decided to partner with Rost. Amherst reluctantly agrees and starts the party formation paperwork. When she asks Narusena to write her name, Narusena, who had been staring at Rost, is caught off guard but complies. After Rost pays the commission fee, their party is officially formed, and they leave the guild together. Rost then begins discussing the Marat labyrinth where they're headed. No one has fully explored the labyrinth, so its final depths and the identity of its master remain unknown. This lack of knowledge has drawn countless adventurers, eventually leading to the formation of Marat, the world's largest labyrinthine city. As they approach the labyrinth, Narusena expresses concern about entering it so soon. Amherst had warned Rost against taking her there, as Narusena is a novice. Rost remembers the advice but chooses to disregard it, explaining that while the labyrinth's outskirts are safe, the open plains outside Marat make finding monsters difficult. The labyrinth offers quicker experience since monsters appear frequently without being overly dangerous. Narusena agrees, and they enter the labyrinth. To contribute, she volunteers to lead since she's the combatant. Rost usually takes the lead himself, but seeing her enthusiasm, he allows it. As they walk, Rost wonders if she's truly capable of fighting, only to be pleasantly surprised when she easily dispatches a group of goblins with impressive boxing skills. Afterward, the defeated goblins leave behind magic stones. Rost explains that adventurers can sell these stones to the guild for money, as they contain stored magical energy used in various tools and equipment. While goblin stones aren't valuable, the 5 they've gathered will cover lodging for the night. They could return to town or go deeper into the labyrinth to earn more, and Narusena, excited, chooses the latter. Deeper inside, Rost suddenly stops her, sensing danger. Confused, Narusena watches as he drops a rock onto a suspicious tile, triggering a pit trap that would have killed her. She marvels at his skill, which is usually the domain of a thief, but Rost attributes it to years of experience. They continue on, and soon encounter an orc, a mid-level monster rarely seen on these floors. Rost believes they can defeat it together but leaves the decision to Narusena. She agrees, but as her first kick lands, she realizes the orc is far tougher than expected. The orc counters, forcing her back, and she finds herself cornered. Just as it's about to strike, Rost intervenes, defeating it with a single blow. Grateful and astonished, Narusena wonders how a healer like Rost could possess such skills. He simply replies that he's picked up some combat abilities over the years. They collect the orc's magic stone, which is larger and more valuable than the goblins. Rost suggests they could head back now, as they've earned enough and Narusena has proven herself, but she wants to explore further. By the end of their journey, they've gathered numerous stones and returned to the guild to trade them in. Amherst is shocked at the number of stones they collected in half a day, especially the orc stone, and scolds Rost for taking a beginner like Narusena into the labyrinth. Rost assures her they stayed on the beginner level and only fought goblins, but they unexpectedly encountered the orc. Narusena confirms this, and Amherst, realizing similar reports of high-level monsters appearing on lower floors, relents. She comments that something bad must be happening deeper in the labyrinth, though it's not her concern. Rost sells their collected gems, and Narusena notices Amherst's excitement, prompting Rost to explain that guild staff receive a generous commission on magic gem sales. Once the money is ready, Rost is shocked to see how much there actually is, but Amherst reminds him that half of it belongs to Narusena. Rost knows he only gets half, yet even that amount is 10 times more than he ever earned with Lightning Blade. That's when he realizes he was scammed by his former party. Amherst finds the whole thing amusing, but Narusena reminds her that the guild is responsible for arbitrating pay disputes. Amherst offers to help Rost reclaim his lost wages, but after a moment of consideration he decides to let it go. He's formed a new party, and wants nothing to do with Lightning Blade anymore. After Rost leaves, the guild branch manager approaches Amherst while she's counting her money. Handsome asks if Rost was just there, and hopes she didn't refer him to any parties. Amherst assures him that she didn't. However, one girl specifically wanted to party with him, so she couldn't stop it. Meanwhile, Rost and Narusena are at an inn, where they're welcomed by the innkeeper's daughter. She asks if Narusena is the girl who recently joined his party, and Rost confirms it but wonders how the news got around so quickly. The girl explains that no one expected him to form a party. Setting that aside, she asks if he's there to eat. Rost would love some food, but he decides to reserve a room first, so he talks to the girl's mother, Mary. Mary is happy to book them a room and asks if they'll be sharing or staying in separate rooms. Narusena blushes a little, but Rost clarifies that they'll need separate rooms, although Narusena quietly likes the idea of sharing with him. Later that night, both go to bed, and alone in her room, Narusena thinks back to the first time she met Rost years earlier. Back then, he saved her from an accident and used his basic healing spell on her, which inspired her to become an adventurer to support him. She trained relentlessly, and when she heard he'd been banished from his party, she rushed to the capital to be the first to join him. However, she realizes now that Rost probably doesn't recognize her at all. She's grown taller, wears different clothes, and even changed her hair color to blue. Despite that, Narusena is determined to support him, even if he doesn't remember her. She's also puzzled about why the people in this city think he's an idiot, given his strength. Back when Rost was with Lightning Blade, the party faced a Hydra. One party member, Siberia, was injured, and Rost healed her physical wounds, but she was also poisoned. When she asked if he could cure the poison, he apologized, admitting he couldn't, and suggested they should have brought an antidote. The party leader, Margulis, criticized Rost, saying that buying antidotes was supposed to be Rost's responsibility as the healer. With Siberia unable to fight, Margulis asked the mage, Armia, to help him, but her flame spell barely scratched the Hydra. So, she gets scared and drops her staff. Margulis has given up on his party's incompetence, so he turns around and orders everyone to retreat immediately. Since Margulis gave up, Armia breaks down and runs away as well, followed by Rost and Siberia, who still can't walk, so Lost is helping her. As they retreated, the Hydra focused its attention on Rost. After their return to the guild, Margulis took pleasure in kicking Rost out of the party, blaming him for their failure, though Rost believed it was a shared responsibility, especially since Margulis and Siberia had stayed up all night in excitement for the fight. Faced with Margulis's fury, Siberia hesitated but ultimately placed the blame on Rost to avoid conflict herself. Rost wakes from a restless dream, still bothered by those memories. Before joining Lightning Blade, he was already known as an idiot healer around town, though he dreamt of becoming a first-rate adventurer. His excitement when joining his first party quickly faded after he realized they only wanted him as bait. During a labyrinth run, Rost was left to fend for himself, while the monsters turned their focus on the other party members, resulting in a massacre from which Rost alone escaped. Since then, he's longed for someone to see him as a true adventurer. One day, he stumbled upon a carriage attacked by goblins. Seeing a frightened young girl, he put himself in harm's way to protect her. He managed to hold his own for a while but was eventually knocked unconscious. When he awoke, the girl was standing over him, and the knight's order had come to her rescue. Despite his failed effort, she thanked him, saying his actions had bought them time, and that he was brave. Rost healed a scratch on her arm, but downplayed his abilities, explaining that basic heal was all he could do. The girl looks confused, so Rost tells her all about his weakness, and how he was tricked into entering the labyrinth, just to be used as bait. She feels sorry that he had to go through such an ordeal, so she stands up and declares that she will become an adventurer in the future, form a party with him, and protect Rost. Rost later realized she was the daughter of a noble family and doubted he'd ever see her again, but her words had lifted his spirits, inspiring him to continue his journey. He trained rigorously, learning from a mentor and developing his skills to the best of his ability. He eventually joined Lightning Blade, but that was of course another disappointment. Still, he's grateful to that girl, whose kindness kept him going when he might have otherwise quit. Now he assumes he'll never see her again and doesn't realize that she might be closer than he thinks. Just then, Narusena knocks on his door, inviting him to join her for breakfast. He agrees, and afterward they head back into the labyrinth to take on the lower floors. Upon entering, Narusena notices an inscription on the ground, a teleportation circle. Rost explains that teleportation circles are rare and were likely placed here by ancient magicians. She asks if they could use it to move around, and Rost confirms, though it requires another teleportation circle to receive them on the other side. They step onto the circle, and a flash of light transports them to one of the mid-level floors. Rost warns her that the monsters here are stronger than the goblins they fought yesterday, so she should be cautious. As they progress, Narusena tries to punch a lich but learns that her physical attacks won't work. Rost suggests retreating, but Narusena reveals a skill of her own. Martial artists, like her, can control their inner energy, or prana, to strengthen their attacks. She coats her fists in prana, delivering a powerful punch that disintegrates the lich. Rost checks on her afterward and heals a minor wound on her arm with a magic item that amplifies his spell. When they return to the guild to sell the stones, Amherst is shocked that they defeated a lich and thrilled about the commission she'll receive. Rost and Narusena earn more money than expected and happily head back to the inn. Along the way, they witness a street brawl, an increasingly common sight as outlaws flood into the town, tarnishing the reputation of honest adventurers. Though it frustrates Rost, there's little he can do to change it. Rost suggests that they just enjoy their money and have a fancy dinner tonight. A little while later, Rost and Narusena are seated at their table, served one of Mary's best dishes. As they eat, Narusena says she has a question she's been meaning to ask. She points to the giant stone pillar on the edge of town and asks what it is. At first she thought it was a building, but it has no windows or doors, and it doesn't look like a monument either, so it's really confusing. Rost shares her confusion and explains that he doesn't know what it is either. He once got curious and asked one of the workers about it while it was still being constructed, but the workers didn't know what it was for or who was paying for it. Narusena can't believe something like that was possible, but apparently an agent just showed up one day with some money and blueprints, so no one ever met the funder. Still, as strange as it may seem, Rost just chalks it up to some billionaire doing random stuff and is fine with it since the tower isn't actually hurting anyone. He does wish, though, that some of that money could have gone toward building a wall for the city since it doesn't have one. Narusena agrees that a city wall would be nice, but at the same time, she doesn't think there's much to worry about. With the number of adventurers in the city, whether it's monsters or thieves that attack, she's sure they'll be able to fight off any threats. After dinner, they head back to their rooms, but before Rost goes to bed, Narusena calls him back. She clearly has something to say but can't bring herself to say it, so she just tells him good night and heads to her room. Inside, she jumps onto her bed, upset because she wanted to tell Rost that she wants to stay in the same room as him, but she couldn't say it, it was too embarrassing. In his room, Rost lies in bed with his mind at ease, grateful to have such a great party member. He's able to continue adventuring thanks to Narusena's support. He doesn't know if he'll ever meet the little girl who inspired him again, but he has a lot to thank Narusena for. Meanwhile, Margulis has just found a new member for the Lightning Blade party, and while he's excited to have Lyra join the team, Siberia doesn't seem to like her much, and Armia is too shy to make eye contact. Now that the team is complete again, Margulis is eager to head out and finally defeat that Hydra once and for all. The party heads back to the swamp to confront the Hydra, and luckily, the Hydra hasn't regrown its head yet, so they won't have to do as much work. Margulis quickly comes up with a plan of attack. He and Lyra will attack from the front, Armia will provide magic support, and Siberia will sneak up from behind. Just as he's about to run into action though, Lyra calls a timeout because she doesn't want to be on the front lines as a healer. Margulis is confused. Rost used to fight on the front lines. After all, Lyra can't believe they forced their previous healer to fight up front, but Siberia recalls that Rost didn't seem to mind. In fact, he was the one who cut off one of the Hydra's heads. Lyra is in disbelief, but Margulis tells her he doesn't expect her to do the same. To make sure she's prepared, he asks if she can cast a detoxification spell against the Hydra's poison, and she confirms she can, so Margulis sets everyone in position to slay the Hydra. Back in town, Rost and Narusena return from their latest labyrinth trip, and Amherst is glad to see they've brought more gems to sell. She reminds Rost not to push Narusena too far since she's still a new adventurer. Rost assures her he's careful about the fights they pick. Amherst is glad but still suggests they think about recruiting new party members to make things easier. Rost agrees that more members would help but decides it isn't worth the hassle since he and Narusena are already making plenty. Amherst admits he's right with how much they're making. They could probably rent a house instead of staying at the inn if they wanted. Narusena is surprised to hear this, so Amherst explains that renting a private room is much more convenient for storage and offers extra privacy for a male and female party. Narusena suddenly seems interested in renting a house, but since Rost doesn't react, Amherst doubts the late-night activity is likely in their case. Speaking of private houses, Rost recalls that Lightning Blade had one, though they forced him to sleep in a storage closet, so it wasn't comfortable. Amherst laughs at his misfortune but points out he was actually lucky to be kicked out. Since his departure, Margulis and the rest of Lightning Blade haven't completed a single mission. Margulis can't understand why, but Lyra thinks he's too oblivious to realize he's not strong enough to take on a Hydra head-on. When Margulis hears her, he's about to yell, but Lyra tells him to be quiet so she can focus on helping Armia recover from her injuries. While she works, Siberia reluctantly admits Rost was more valuable than they realized. Even though he wasn't the best healer, he managed to get the job done and didn't notice they were skimming his pay, which made him the perfect party member. Margulis regrets kicking Rost out and decides he'll just ask Rost to rejoin. Sure, he'll be grateful to return to the famous Blades of Lightning. Siberia, however, is beginning to doubt if she wants to stay in the party at all. By the next morning, Lyra has finally finished healing Armia. Armia wakes up and thanks her for the help, but Lyra is just happy she could assist. She asks if Armia feels well enough to eat, and since she does, Lyra heads downstairs to get her some food. When she reaches the kitchen to ask where the food is stored, she realizes that Siberia and Margulis are gone, and she has no idea where they went. Margulis and Siberia are currently at the guild, where Margulis loudly proclaims that he is willing to graciously allow Rost to return to his party. Everyone, especially Rost, is shocked by this. Narusena and Amherst are nearby, and Amherst explains the blonde guy is the one who kicked Rost out. Margulis assumes Rost might be upset about the pay he was scammed out of and apologizes. He promises that Rost will get a fair share this time around. Plus it could really use his help since the new healer Margulis hired isn't very useful in combat. Siberia thinks there's no way Rost will actually agree to Margulis's request. But to her shock, Rost actually thanks Margulis for the offer. Narusena refuses to let Rost be stolen from her. So she runs out in front of him and starts yelling at Margulis, saying Rost will never join his party again. Rost touches her shoulder and tells Narusena that she doesn't need to worry about him leaving. He then turns to Margulis and says he was only thanking him to be polite, but he has no interest in ever joining his party again. Margulis can't believe he got turned down, so he gets desperate and accuses Narusena of trying to use Rost because she realized how useful he is to have around. All of Margulis's aggressive pointing is starting to get on Rost's nerves, so he grabs Margulis's hand and warns him that if he ever does anything to hurt Narusena, Rost will make sure his body is mangled beyond recognition. Rost then turns to leave, and Narusena pauses for a second to rub it in Margulis's face one last time. After they've left, Margulis doesn't know what to do, but he still wants to defeat that Hydra. He yells at Amherst to recommend a new adventurer for his party, preferably someone who can handle fighting on the front lines alongside him. Amherst really doesn't want to have to deal with him, but it looks like she won't have to because an adventurer walks out from the crowd, a man who looks like he completed all the side quests before arriving here. The mysterious man offers to join the party and asks if Margulis is satisfied with his strength. Margulis checks him out, and the man definitely looks strong, but to be sure, Margulis decides to test his sword skills. He draws his sword and charges at the man, but with a simple swing, the man instantly disarms Margulis, making him look foolish in front of the entire guild. After recovering from the embarrassment, Margulis says he'll accept the man into his party. However, Siberia doesn't think it's wise to trust a man who wears a mask all the time. But Margulis insists they have no choice if they don't defeat that Hydra. Lightning Blaze's reputation as a strong party will sink like a rock. He approaches the man and asks for his name, and the man replies Shig. Back at Lost End, Narusena is checking herself in the mirror when she hears someone knocking on Rost's door. She goes out to check who it is and finds Sheila at Rost's door. For some reason, her first thought is that Sheila is trying to make a move on Rost. However, after thinking about it for a bit, she realizes that couldn't be possible. Once Rost finally opens the door, Sheila informs him that he has guests waiting downstairs. This is surprising, but Rost decides to go meet with them to see what this is about. Once he gets downstairs, Rost and Narusena meet with Armia and Lyra. Armia feels bad for coming to him with such a brazen request, but she asks Rost if he could help them just this once. Margulis still intends to go after that Hydra and has even hired a new warrior to help with the mission, but Lyra doesn't think it's going to be enough to win. For one thing, Margulis is still too stubborn to buy an antidote potion because it costs money, and he's never going to realize how reckless he is until someone ends up dying because of him. Armia knows it's too late to apologize now, but she acknowledges how strong Rost is. If he hadn't cut off the Hydra's head the last time they fought it, the entire party would have been wiped out. Rost still doesn't think he did all that much, but Lyra points out that the party struggled to survive against a Hydra that had already lost 2 heads, so they would have been dead meat if it had been in perfect condition. Rost asks what exactly Armia is requesting, so she stands up and says she wants Rost to fight with them because she's sure they can defeat the Hydra if he is there. She's essentially asking him to rejoin Lightning Blade, but Rost already had this conversation with Margulis earlier today, and his answer remains the same. Narusena wonders why Armia seems so determined to help Margulis out, as this whole ordeal must be horrible for her to deal with. Armia acknowledges that Margulis has a lot of flaws but, even so, he's still her party member. Narusena becomes angry after hearing this, pointing out that Rost was her party member as well, yet Armia did nothing to support him when he was being mistreated. Armia begins crying and apologizes to Rost, explaining that at the time she was scared that if she didn't go along with what Margulis said, she'd be kicked out of the party as well. As a new adventurer, she doesn't know of any other parties, but she now realizes that what she did was wrong and that Margulis is wrong for how he treated Rost. Even though she disagrees with Margulis's way of doing things, she still doesn't want him to get himself killed in an unwinnable battle. Lyra tells Rost that Armia is sincere in her apology and has been agonizing over it for a long time. While she understands if Rost declines the request, she asks that he at least consider accepting Armia's apology. Rost gets up and tells Armia that he holds no grudge against her, so he will accept her apology, though he still has no intention of returning to Lightning Blade. Armia is disappointed but accepts his answer and says she won't bother him about it anymore. Just then, Mary comes over with a whole feast to cheer Armia up, as she looks like she hasn't been eating well. While Armia eats, Rost talks with Lyra and asks if there's any way for her to take Armia and leave Margulis's party. If she could have done that, though, Lyra wouldn't have come here in the first place. Rost knows how Margulis treats people, so he suggests that Lyra leave his party anyway, but Lyra refuses, as that would mean leaving Armia to fend for herself under Margulis's leadership. The next day, Margulis finally introduces Lyra to Shig, as they will be fighting the Hydra again today. She seems to recognize him from somewhere and wants to have a word with him. She asks what he's doing here and why he's disguising himself, but Shig pretends he has never met her before and tries to walk away. As he does, she notices the sword on his back, which used to belong to someone named Ronaldo. She accuses him of stealing it, but Shig denies this, saying it was given to him as a gift, so he is no thief, although he clears his name of theft. The fact that he admitted knowing Ronaldo lets Lyra know that he is indeed the same Shig she knew. However, she decides to keep his secret identity hidden, as it seems important to him. Later that day, Rost and Narusena are heading into the labyrinth as they usually do, but he can't help worrying about Armia and the rest of Lightning Blade, as he has no idea if they're truly ready for the battle. At the same time, the Lightning Blade heads out with Margulis, more confident than ever, as they march into Hydra's territory. We then see Narusena facing a group of large, muscular orcs armed with heavy clubs. Using her fighting skills, she only needs her own strength to defeat these opponents, each one over 3 times her size. After taking down the orcs, Rost asks Narusena if she wants to rest, but she appears ready to keep going just then. Her stomach rumbles, making the healer laugh as he teases that even the tireless Narusena gets hungry. With that, he invites her to join him for lunch. Soon, when the food is prepared, Rost is stunned by the amount they have. Narusena explains that Mary from the inn noticed she hadn't eaten anything and packed this feast for her. As they eat, Rost mentions the Hydra, a highly venomous creature with a muscular body and scales that resist both physical and magical attacks. Hearing this, Narusena looks worried and asks about the Hydra's whereabouts. Rost explains that although they aren't found everywhere, Hydras are fairly common compared to even stronger monsters. He mentions that research has led to some effective strategies against them, like an antidote for their venom, which is fatal without treatment. The antidote is available in Marnat, though it isn't cheap, so many groups rely on support healers. For the Blade of Lightning team, Lyra will carefully monitor the group. Rost assures Narusena that although Margulis often brags, he is a skilled swordsman who can be formidable if he stays in shape and takes the opponent seriously. Siberia is also highly skilled in speed and agility. Since the Hydra has multiple heads with a wide field of vision, Siberia might still manage to sneak around and attack from behind. Hearing this, Narusena comments that Rost seems full of praise for Blade of Lightning. Rost, slightly embarrassed, replies that he's only stating the facts. Narusena lets it go and changes the subject, mentioning that they always go to the same labyrinth, which is becoming tiring. Rost asks if she'd like to try somewhere different, and she suggests they check out the nearby swamps. Meanwhile, Blade of Lightning confronts the Hydra. Margulis lands a powerful blow on one of its necks, and then Shig steps in, cutting off another head. When it's time to strike a second head, Shig hesitates, and Margulis accuses him of holding back to let the leader get credit as a Hydra slayer. Laughing arrogantly, Margulis charges at the Hydra, but nearly gets hit in the process. While healing Siberia, Lyra questions Margulis's reckless approach, but Siberia just says that it's all part of the night's thrill. Lyra shrugs off the answer, heals her partner, and Siberia jumps back into the fight. The healer observing the fight notes that Shig's earlier attacks have already weakened the Hydra, making it move more slowly. Siberia distracts the Hydra, allowing Margulis to keep striking, while Armia supports them with her spells. At this pace, they're confident the Hydra will be defeated. Suddenly, the Hydra throws a rock at Armia, knocking her down and making her vulnerable. One of the Hydra's heads approaches her, and the fear she feels releases an unusual substance that confuses Siberia. Shig explains that monsters can absorb a person's fear and transform it into energy. Shig is surprised, as this fear is usually invisible. Lyra touches the energy in the air and senses it as mana, a force normally found only deep within a labyrinth. As the Hydra absorbs this mana, it begins mutating since monsters can transform by absorbing large amounts of mana. In response, Shig tells Lyra to look after Armia and calls for Margulis to retreat. Margulis protests, eager to continue and earn the title of Hydra Slayer, but as he strikes, his weapon breaks, leaving him defenseless. The Hydra attacks, but Rost arrives in time to save him. Seeing the healer's arrival, Shig asks Rost to care for Armia. When Rost reaches her, he asks Lyra about her condition. Lyra explains that as a sorceress, Armia has high resistance to magic, so healing spells may not work well on her. Rost takes charge and casts multiple healing spells one after the other, a technique he used during his time with Blade of Lightning. Lyra, surprised, remarks that this approach is like treating a cold with too much medicine, yet Armia begins to regain consciousness, though she's not yet ready to fight. Then, Shig warns that the Hydra appears to be focused on Rost. The healer explains that it likely remembers him from past encounters. Narusena volunteers to help, and Rost agrees but reminds her to back off if it becomes too dangerous. At the same time, Shig suggests that the rest of Blade of Lightning stay out of the fight, and everyone agrees, especially since Margulis is now unarmed due to his broken sword. So Rost and Narusena attack the Hydra together, showing a strength Margulis never knew his former teammate had. The warrior is puzzled about why Shig's sword didn't break. Lyra explains that Shig's weapon is magical, a legendary sword with immense power. Margulis thought such equipment was only a myth, but if it were real, he wondered how Shig managed to wield it. Meanwhile, Narusena keeps up her attacks on the Hydra, but is eventually struck and taken hostage. Rost deduces that the Hydra wants a one-on-one fight. Siberia can't understand how a monster could be this intelligent, and Lyra explains that creatures that mutate can develop both higher intelligence and cruelty. With that, Rost orders everyone to stay back and charges at his massive opponent. At that moment, a man far away observes the flame of a candle flicker, writes something on a piece of paper, and closes his eyes. This causes Rost to suddenly collapse. He tries to get up to help his fallen friend but quickly loses consciousness. Moments later, he awakens with powerful energy flowing through his body. The man who caused this reaction wonders aloud about something that should have stayed dormant. Then a horn appears on Rost's forehead. The Hydra charges at him, but Rost instantly reacts, slicing off all the creatures' heads in a single blow, ending the fight. Exhausted, Rost collapses again. When he wakes up, he asks about Narusena's condition, and she reassures him, explaining that Lyra had given her an antidote. Lyra makes sure to mention it was quite expensive, so she expects reimbursement. Narusena then questions Rost about his strange transformation, but he has no idea what she's talking about. Margulis, feigning admiration, declares that he always knew how remarkable Rost was, and that, with him, they could defeat even the most challenging monsters, including the master of the Marat Labyrinth. He then promises to split the Hydra's magic stone among 3 people. Confused, Rost asks why only 3, and Margulis explains it would go to him, Rost, and Siberia, as the rookies hadn't contributed much and would receive their pay. He adds that the young woman who came with the healer was only an assistant and wouldn't receive anything. When Rost inquires about Armia, Siberia coldly responds that Armia is gone, as they weren't even sure she'd ever wake up, let alone be useful as a mage. Margulis suggests they could sell her, remarking that she's attractive and would appeal to certain buyers. Without hesitation, Narusena punches Margulis, who begins threatening to expel her from the guild, citing rules against fighting among adventurers. However, Shig and Lyra claim they hadn't seen anything, shutting down his argument. Siberia, however, says she'd seen it and would testify for the leader. Shig quickly changes his stance, admitting he'd heard Margulis discuss selling their teammate on the black market. As a guild representative, he orders everyone to follow him back to the city. Back in the city, everyone learns that Shig was a royal adventurer sent by the Adventurers Guild to investigate safety issues in the area. During his investigation of Blade of Lightning, he discovered their actions and decided they would be expelled from the guild. Due to the human trafficking threat, they were sentenced to forced labor for life. As Margulis and Siberia panicked, Rost calls Shig aside to talk. He asks the representative to show mercy, believing that although Margulis and Siberia are now motivated by fame and wealth, they hadn't always been that way and hoped they could have a second chance. Hearing this, Shig orders Margulis and Siberia to go to the farthest city they can find and never return. The pair quickly agrees and leaves before he can change his mind. Armia asks if that was the right decision, and Rost replies that he'd stay in Marde to keep an eye on them. Narusena feels guilty about causing their exile, but Rost reassures her that it was the best choice. He thanks her for all her help and tells her he looks forward to more of their adventures together. Later, Shig and Lyra discuss the importance of keeping an eye on the Marat Guild, as the royal city suspected that the issues there might be related to the local branch or its master. He asked her group, the Hilo Formal, to assist in this task. Lyra agreed, on the condition that Armia would be included, as she couldn't abandon the young mage. Shig readily agreed, feeling that he too wanted to stay close to Rost and these promising young adventurers. That's it for today's video. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to like and give your feedback in the comment section.